What's up, Hoodads? Welcome inside Black and Gold. Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak. We've been busy with restructures, free agency signings. There's been extensions, a lot going on in the world of the Saints, including a meet and greet at the facility, which shout out to the New Orleans organization for doing that. I don't know of how things are anywhere else, but having the whole coaching staff come in and getting to have a little mini tour kind of the cafeteria area, I thought was really cool.
Yeah, we got free lunch, which they always say there's no such thing as a free lunch, which I guess is true because we were working there, but whatever. We're going to talk about that. That's going to be the final segment. This first segment, we're going to go through a rundown of all the things that have happened for just out in front. It is noon on Tuesday. So if you are looking and saying, why are you talking about this and this and this and this and this? Take a second to say, okay, did it happen after noon on Tuesday? Because if the answer is yes, then that is your answer. Anyway, so we're going to kind of recap what has happened so far, which isn't a ton, but, we've got a couple signings of Saints players going elsewhere. We've got a big money extension coming in. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the restructures. Second segment, we're just going to do one of those things where we talk about Derek Carr for 15 to 20 minutes, which I know everyone loves. But yeah, for a couple things out front. First, I do want to say I apologize. We didn't do an episode last week. We were initially planning to, and then I was like, it's Mardi Gras and Steve's on vacation. He's in Disney World. I'd have to do it myself, and I have to fill in on sports talk. And I was like, you know what? We're just going to take the week off. And so we did. And I think, there was some stuff that happened. I kind of felt weird not putting out an episode to talk about how everyone was mad at Derek Carr for not taking a pay cut, but we can do that today. So I enjoyed the week. Steve, I'm sure you enjoyed the week. How was Disney World?
Disney is a lot of fun. Got to check out all the parks. Anyone going, you got to get the lightning pass to be able to skip the lines. It's an extra fee, and it's just mandatory though if you don't want to wait 2.5, 3 hours for rides.
My thing is how valuable is your time?
Yes,
because if you believe that your time is of value, then whatever it costs, it's worth it. And then you can just laugh at the peasants as you walk by. Like, suckers.
It is pretty brutal. You just, you see this long line snaking out and you just walk by them like that meme of Gyllenhaal, kissing and waving to everyone.
One of the reasons the line is so long is because so many people buy these lightning passes. It's like, why are we stuck in traffic right now? It's not because of the traffic. It's because of all the assholes pulling up on the right, even though they know that lane ends. And then they have to merge in, and only 2 to 3 people can get by before someone's a coward and fine, go ahead. And so you're that person, but you paid for that privilege. It would be funny if they sold that on highways, that privilege on highways.
Definitely good to be back home though, man. The food definitely not. I was told to check out these places at Disney. Was not impressed by the food, unfortunately. The rides and everything else, good time at Mickey Land.
That's the problem. Leaving New Orleans to go anywhere, the food is not going to be better most of the time. So anyway,
even my sliders and wings were better at the Saints facility.
Right. I'm glad you had a good time. I do have one more order of business to get to before we go any further. And just talk what is, oh my God, this confetti fire and balloons. Oh my God. Thank you, StreamYard, for remembering it's my birthday today.
Oh,
how nice
Jeff,
of you.
Happy birthday.
They even loaded up the confetti in the cannons. How about that? Isn't that cool?
I got to remember that. You're the day before.
Oh my God, and fireworks. They brought fireworks too. Oh no, not rain. Anyway.
Not on your birthday.
Yeah, I have all these buttons I can press, so I decided, it's my birthday today. Happy birthday to me. I am doing this. That's how I'm celebrating.
Fun.
Anyway, okay. So let's do a podcast. Let's do a podcast about the Saints. We've talked about Disney World. We've talked about birthdays. We've talked about sliders and whatnot. But let's talk about free agency. And, again, like I said, this first segment is just going to kind of be a rundown. We're going to be a little all over the place. But we're just going to kind of go through the things that have happened, full well knowing that the Saints have not been active in free agency, which is kind of the par for the course, but they have gotten under the salary cap. So we'll talk about that in a bit. 2 guys that are gone. Cornerback Paulson Adebo is headed to the Giants. Safety Will Harris headed to the Commanders. In both instances, I kind of wanted the Saints to be in the conversation, but at the same time, it was like, okay, I want it to happen on my own terms. I don't want the Saints to be in the conversation if it means, hey, you're going to give Paulson Adebo a crazy contract that doesn't make sense right now. And, they didn't do that. His contract with the Giants is 3 years, $54 million, which is more than it was initially reported as. It was initially reported as like $30 million, which I was like, hey, I think the Saints could have probably matched that. 54 is a different animal. And I don't know why that was the disconnect initially. But Paulson Adebo got a new home with the Giants, who are spending money like they don't expect to have draft picks.
What could that mean?
I think it's pretty obvious what that means. They're going to trade up, go get Cam Ward.
Right. With Paulson Adebo, definitely stings considering, you thought he was going to come possibly into this year as cornerback number one. Now, no more Lattimore, no more Paulson Adebo. And you definitely feel like you kind of, starting over at the corner spot for the Saints right now. You still obviously have a guy like Alontae Taylor around and Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yeah, I feel okay about the two guys they have. I don't know if they have a top cornerback. I don't think they do. I think they have a couple quality corners. But then I am worried about, like when Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry were your depth, I felt really good about it. Now, not only are they not your depth, you don't have any depth, right? Like they are your starters and you got no one behind them. So you're probably going to have to the Saints, sometimes they'll go out and sign a player or two. Cornerback is not typically a position you've seen them spend big on in free agency. They tend to draft that position. So maybe it's something you look at in the draft. Maybe by the time we're done recording this podcast, they'll have spent that cap space that they built on a cornerback. I don't know. But yeah,
Marjon Charles and Rico Payton, baby.
Right. Well, I actually like Rico Payton. Again, it's like, I like their ability to develop young cornerbacks.
Yes.
But at the same time, it was nice to have like that set it and forget it lineup for a long time because, we've seen the Saints without we all know too well what it's like watching a team that can't defend on the edges of the field. Right. Like the Breeze era was littered with teams that could not, cover anything. I was trying to come up with a clever way to say that, but I blanked on it. I almost said catch a cold, but that's a receiver. So what's a funny way to say a cornerback can't cover?
Burnt toast.
Yeah, I guess that works. It doesn't elicit that image of like it's like a blanket with holes in it. Like I don't know. We'll come back to that. But the guy that I think people may be even more disappointed to get out of town, because I think a lot of people are like, okay, I like Paulson Adebo. Is he a top corner? Probably not. Would he be necessary on a team like this? It's like, probably. But do you want to pay him $15 million a year? Probably not. Will Harris, on the other hand, I feel like a lot of people are like, hey, we should be able to get him back on a similar contract to what he paid him last year. And the answer to that question was no, they could not. He went to Washington. He signed a 2-year, $8 million contract, which doesn't sound like a ton, but keep in mind, the Saints brought him in last year on a 1-year, $1.2 million contract. They brought him in on a veteran minimum contract. And, I think the contract he signed is an indicator that other teams watched him play and were like, okay, it's a pretty good player. Like, this is a guy we should be willing to pay. Like, that's not necessarily, fringe roster money. That's, we're going to pay this guy because we think he's going to be a part of our situation. Like when the Saints signed him last year, it was kind of like, oh, maybe he'll make the team. You don't sign him to a 2-year, $8 million deal unless you expect them to be a part of your core defense. So I don't know. It's another situation where it's like, it's a bummer to see him get out the door, but I wouldn't have wanted to see the Saints throw an $8 million contract his way either. So it's tough.
Yeah, I thought his, year here was okay, but it wasn't anything where I'm devastated that they've lost Will Harris, except for the fact that the safety position just has a lot of questions around it as a whole.
They don't have any safeties.
Right.
And who are the safeties? Like right now it's Tyrann Mathieu and Jordan Howden, which everyone's, a lot of people think Tyrann doesn't have it anymore. And I disagree with that. But what Will Harris brought was a guy who was not afraid to come up and hit and lay the wood on people. And you need that at least one of your safeties. Like Malcolm Jenkins, I felt was that guy for a while next to Marcus Williams, who had that in him in moments. Paulson Adebo, even on the cornerback position, I always felt like one of his best assets was the ability to come up and hit. And I don't know if they have that anymore. Now they're going to play a lot more zone.
Is Ugo still under contract or is he free?
I mean, he was never on more than a 1-year deal, so like they could bring him back. But either way, like the point stands. I just don't. And he's not a guy that I would say like, he's gonna come up and lay the wood on somebody. He's small. Like I want a big, heavy duty safety who can come and hurt someone. And I don't mean that in the sense of like actually hurting someone, but you understand what I'm saying. Like I want big hits out of my secondary, and I just don't see where they're coming from. Now you're gonna be playing a lot more zone defense, right? But like I want a Derwin James type player out there, and I don't think you have that. So I think there's another shoe to drop here somewhere.
Well, the good news is, after being, in the red so much, the Saints are now cap compliant heading into, tomorrow's start of the league year. And we'll see if they do any other maneuvering. Some of the contract restructures we haven't heard about, anything with like a Cam Jordan, a Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, some of those other big names. Yeah,
well, first, I do want to talk Chase Young. Chase Young, the big move they've made. So they've made 2 moves. They traded for Devon Godchow. Is that how you say it? Godchow?
Godchow, yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Got you. I got you. It's Godchow. Traded for Devon Godchow. It's a situation that this is a guy who's started, 67 games over the last 4 years, 67 to 68 possible games. He was a key part of that rotation with the Patriots. Not a great team, obviously, but, you're talking about a guy who has started a lot of games, plays a position that you need in nose tackle, and you're able to bring him in for what I would argue is the most minimal asset that you could possibly, like you have to trade something to call it a trade, right? You can't just say, I'm trading you, like they talk about like a bag of balls, right? Like that's like, you have to trade something. Like I guess you could probably just trade cash, but the Saints aren't exactly a cash rich team. So they're not going to ever be the team that's trading cash. So you trade a 7th round pick 2 years from now for a guy that's about the minimum you could possibly give up and still call it a trade. So I feel like that's a pretty good deal to get a guy who's proven in the league for basically nothing, and all you have to do is pay him.
That one was, a head scratcher for me on the Patriots part. That's like, do they know something we don't know about Godchow?
I think they're just kind of rebuilding that situation around Mike Vrabel, and he doesn't fit what he wants to do, and he fits what the Saints need to do. So kind of that's just a win-win.
It just seemed odd to me, just the 7th rounder. To me, Godchow's definitely worth more than that. So
yeah,
I like this deal for the Saints, obviously.
I think it was a situation where they were like, we're going to cut him because he makes too much money and we don't really have a use for him. Okay, let's call around and see if anyone wants him. And if anyone, what will you give us? Okay, that's more than nothing. So we'll take that. I think that's how that goes.
Sold, baby, right.
But Chase Young, on the other hand, 3-year deal, which 3-year contracts are kind of the new thing in the NFL. Like everyone's signing everyone to 3-year contracts. The Saints have been here for a while. I think one of the reasons it's becoming more popular is because you can only prorate a signing bonus over 5 years. So if you sign someone to a 5-year contract, you're prorating that over those years. If you sign someone to a 3-year contract, you can add 2 void years and prorate it over that. And I think that's why more teams are starting to do what the Saints do and take advantage of void years for these crazy contracts, because you couldn't sign these crazy contracts. You couldn't pay Myles Garrett $40 million a year without void years. Anyway, so Chase Young, 3 years, it's $51 million contract worth a maximum of $57 million, $17 million annually. I think it's a good deal for the Saints. I think Chase had a better year than people give him credit for, because they came in with probably unreasonable expectations of like, he's going to get 20 sacks, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. He ended up with 5.5 sacks. He was tied with Carl Granderson for second on the team behind Brian Brzee. I think the Saints' bigger issue last year was stopping the run.
Yes.
And you're not going to get 15, 20 sacks unless you get teams into obvious passing situations all the time. And the Saints weren't getting teams in obvious passing situations ever. And I put that more on the interior line than anything else. But regardless, I think a $17 million contract for a 25-year-old edge rusher who's entering his prime, and you could end up in a situation where that contract feels like a steal 2 years from now if he continues to kind of get what he needs to in that Brandon Staley defense. I think it's a good deal. I would have been disappointed if he went somewhere for less than that, because it would have been an indicator the Saints didn't even try to bring him back. And I think he is a talented player, and
or that he didn't want to be here, but that's clearly not an issue.
Yeah, I think he does want to be here.
Right.
I'd be surprised if he didn't have any interest on the open market. And the timing of this deal would indicate that, like if you got it done earlier in the week, that would be like, hey, he didn't even wait, right? Like Zach Bond signing with the Eagles, like he didn't even wait to talk to other teams before signing that deal with the Eagles. And Zach got like the exact same contract at the linebacker position. Like I think they paid Zach Bond 3 years, $51 million, something in that range. So waiting to do it until yesterday, I think was a sign that Chase was like, all right, I want my agent to go around and see if anyone's willing to blow this deal out of the water.
Yeah.
And I think that the answer was no. And so he comes back and signs it with the Saints. And I think it's a win-win. And in part because if Chase had gone and signed elsewhere, his contract would have voided and you would have been on the hook for $9 million in dead money that you can now push forward and account for in other ways. So it was kind of there was kind of a $9 million incentive, like whatever you pay, you can kind of count that against the cap this year and push that money forward. So, it's whatever it's a charge against the cap this year, you can actually eliminate $9 million from what it would have been. So I don't know. I think it's a good deal personally.
Still a head scratcher though, that Chase Young is just 25 years old. It feels like he's been around way longer than that. My only real issue is kind of like a Brian Brzee. I like him as a pass rusher and putting pressure on the other team, but against the run, I just don't feel like Chase Young's been very good. Yeah,
I'm interested to see how they use him.
Yeah.
And because he's never really played as an outside linebacker. I think he did minimally on Steve Wilkes' defense with the 49ers for that half a season he spent out in San Francisco. So I just don't know how they're going to deploy him. Now, I don't think your edge players, your outside linebackers are as important against the run as they would be in a 4-3. So I think that does take some of that off, right? And I do think one of the reasons, we talked to Brandon Staley, and I want to get more into Brandon Staley in the final segment. We talked about the coaches, but like one thing he talked about was like, hey, are you committed to a 3-4, 4-3? It was like, I'm committed to doing whatever the players on the team can do.
Right. Let's see who's on the roster first.
Yeah, and I do think that's one of Brandon's strengths is that he is versatile and his defense can do a lot of different things. It's one of the things that works against him at times because it gets a little too complicated, but I do think that he's more than willing to adjust his scheme to suit a player's strengths. And that was something that DA never did to a degree that was excruciating because it was like, I think Zach Bond can contribute. You just got to find a way to get him on the field. Never did. Caden Ellis, same way. So we'll see. But either way, that's the one big deal the Saints have inked so far. And it's an important position. Like I don't think you're gonna you're gonna get better without talented edge rushers, and you got one.
You got to hope that obviously we haven't seen the ceiling from Chase Young, and like I said, just 25 still a hell of a lot more I expect from him. And you consider last year he was coming back from that neck surgery. Right. Just looking forward to another year of him in black and gold. And yeah, the going rate for defensive ends, outside linebackers in the NFL right now is pretty exorbitant. So not a bad deal for the Saints here.
Yeah, the top of the market is set at $40 million a year.
Hello,
that's crazy. Like Chase Young is making defensive tackle money, right? Like he's 20. That contract is tied for 26 with Ed Oliver from the Bills.
Wow,
right? Miles Garrett is making twice that. Max Crosby is making twice that. I would be more concerned about the deal if we were coming off a season where Chase was on the injury report every week. He missed 3 games. He was battling through injuries. Because that's been a thing for him throughout his career, his injuries. And he actually had a very injury-free season. You knock on wood, but that was a big question mark. There's a reason that he signed a 1-year, $13 million contract with all of these gameplay incentives that he got every single one. Now, I would have preferred if they had included incentives in this deal a little bit more, because I think, hey, why do you think he played in all 17 games? So I don't know. I think it would have been smart to try to include that, but it's not a crazy deal. And so I'm okay with it.
I think, too, the most impressive play for me from him last year, I know you're going to know where I'm going here. Not any of the sacks. On the field late. Yeah, it was like, what just happened?
I don't even know if that's impressive, more so than it was just kind of funny because it's like, it's like a little trick play almost. But He made some nice plays that like kind of get forgotten. He would have had a 90-yard scoop and score if not for Carl Granderson knocking the ball away from against the Cowboys. Like there were nice moments, but it kind of got overshadowed by the ugliness of that season. Right. And so I wanted to keep him around. I think the number is reasonable. We can do that. Just kind of going forward, let's talk about the restructures. So we didn't really talk about Derek Carr yet. We'll talk about it a lot in the second segment. So we don't really get into a ton of it here, but the Saints did restructure that contract. I don't have a ton to say about it in the sense that I've been saying that was going to be the case for a while now. So I'm not going to suddenly be mad about it. But they've also restructured Eric McCoy, Carl Granderson, Cesar Ruiz, Demario Davis, which is a little surprising to me, Pete Werner, and Colin Saunders. As of 12:30 on Tuesday, the Saints have cleared about $15.8 million in cap space beyond the cap. So they started $50 million over. They are now just under $16 million beneath the cap. So that's money they can use. And to me, that indicates that there's a signing coming because I don't think you would clear that much space unless you had a plan to use it. So like, keep that in mind. But, it's kind of the process we thought. The only surprise to me was Demario Davis in the sense that you probably didn't have to do it. But I think it's telling that they are committed to Demario in this defense. And so, he wants to play longer than LeBron. So I guess their plan is for him to do that here.
Yeah. I'm just curious, are we going to get anything reworked with a Cam Jordan or a Taysom Hill to get some more cap space available right now?
Yeah. I mean, you don't need it right now.
Right.
So I always kind of felt like a pay cut is something that you're not trying to rush. If I'm taking a pay cut, if I'm a player and you're coming to me and saying, I want you to take a pay cut, my one thing is I'll think about it, but I also want to know, what are you going to do with this money if I'm giving it back to you? Like, I'm not just giving you my money that I do not have to give you. The Saints are not in a position where cutting Taysom Hill or Cam Jordan, really the only two players, because Derek Carr did not take a pay cut, really the only two players that you're in a position to even ask, because Tyrann Mathieu and Demario took pay cuts last year. So, like, I think if I'm trying to get a guy to take a pay cut, I want to be able to at least say, like, we are asking you to take a pay cut
to get
so we can do this. Right. So we can make things better around you and we have a better chance to win because of XYZ. Right. Doing it prior to even free agency opening is like, we need you to take a pay cut because you're not worth it. You know what I mean? So that's why I always felt like that was going to happen later in the process if it happens. And we'll see. I think Taysom Hill is probably more likely to take a pay cut, whereas Cam, I don't know. I think that'll come down to what you commit to him on paper of like how you're going to use him. But either way, you're in a position now where you can make moves without having to worry about that. And then maybe that's something that's like, hey, we need to sign our draft picks. How are we going to do that? The other thing that happened is the Saints extended Nathan Shepard, which cleared a little bit of space. He was going to count $7 million against the cap this year. So I don't know what the new number is, but you do that, you extend him a year so that you can push that cap out over a couple more seasons.
I wasn't crazy about that one just because the interior of the D line has been an issue, and I don't necessarily understand extending him just to free up some money.
Well, I mean, I do think that what these decisions are telling you is that they feel like with the new scheme you're bringing in, you're going to solve a lot of these problems with that. Like, I think what's being kind of projected is that the team believes that scheme was a bigger issue than talent in terms of stopping the run. And you're going to throw more bodies at the problem in this scheme, and that should solve things. I don't know if I buy that. I would have liked to see them kind of rebuild that defensive interior a lot more than we are seeing. And hey, they may go and draft, two blue chip defensive linemen, and suddenly it's like, well, they are rebuilding it. Just, the players that you're extending are depth pieces. But no, I agree with you. I was kind of hoping for more of an overhaul than we're seeing.
Maybe we can get something more out of Christian Boyd this year.
Yeah, no, I mean, he does profile as a nose. He needs to put on some weight. You know, that's the biggest difference, in my opinion, of like a nose tackle versus a 3 technique is like you need to just kind of be a tree stump in the middle of that line. And they don't really have anybody like that. But he does kind of profile as that. He has the traits to do that. I don't know. Colin Saunders is another interesting guy. He's kind of more of a bowling ball type player. He's a guy who's always going to want to get upfield a little bit more. But, you know, that's one of the interesting restructures to me because I don't think you had to restructure Pete or Colin. Now, Pete makes sense in the perspective of we signed him to an extension. We want to keep him around.
Yeah.
Colin, I feel like you could have moved on from. Like there was really nothing preventing you from just saying, okay, we're going to cut you. We're going to save, you know, not a ton, but it's not going to hurt us. And instead they restructured him to save $1.9 million against the cap, which is to me more of a statement that they like how he fits in this new scheme. So I don't know. Again, it's going to be difficult to know what to expect until we see how they deploy these guys. What's the scheme that Brandon is running? But it's not making anyone happy. Like the Saints, you got to give them credit for being consistent because one thing they almost never seem to do is what the fans want. Like, you know, and to be fair, you shouldn't. That's not how you should make your decisions. Like, if you're a front office with any cojones whatsoever, you should not be like, well, they don't like Derek Carr, so we can't bring him back. Like, that can't be why you make roster decisions. So now the problem is they don't seem to be right either. Like you can get away with doing unpopular things as long as those unpopular things turn out to be the right thing. But the problem is so many of these unpopular decisions also seem to end up being the wrong decision. And that's just a recipe to be hated. So I don't know. Like Howie Roseman has balanced that where he finds ways to do exactly what the fans want, but also the right thing at the same time. And so he's a hero, you know? I don't know.
Even though he's taking beer cans to the forehead.
Well, I mean, they love him so much that they just had to throw beer at him because they were like, Howie, I love you. Take a beer. And he just can't catch, apparently. I
don't even know if he was looking.
I don't think it was malicious.
Right.
People just wanted to give him a beer so bad that they threw it at him when he wasn't even paying attention. So that is what it is.
Yeah. Who knows what they'll be throwing at Mickey?
Not beer. At least not unopened cans of beer. Maybe they'll throw their own beer. Anyway, that's it. That's free agency to this point. I think a lot's going to change. You know, I just tweeted this. Like, I don't think you would have freed up $16 million ahead of March 12th unless you were trying to get something done. So by the time you listen to this podcast, something significant might have happened. Right now, we're kind of in the middle ground. But you got something?
No, just curious. There's some guys out there that possibly could be back, like a Juwan Johnson. Haven't heard any really rumblings on him in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard that this could be some interest out there. You know, he's kind of like Chase Young in the sense that if you extend him, you can avoid $6 million in dead cap charges this year. So there's some incentive there to get it done. I kind of think he will be back. But either way, we'll see. Let's close this segment off. We're going to come back. Let's talk more about Derek Carr, what Kellen Moore had to say about that situation. What are our thoughts on the Saints sticking with Derek Carr? All that good stuff. This is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. Stick around. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller. Subscribe if you haven't done that. Hit us up on YouTube, obviously at WWL Sports. Obviously, if you're watching, that's where we are. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can hit me up on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak, Steve at Steve Geller WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. And this will be a podcast for at least one more season that at least once every 3 episodes has to take the temperature on how much people despise Derek Carr.
Still up here.
Still, yeah, the temperature is high, and I don't think it's going down anytime soon. Now we're a couple days behind on this. Obviously, this restructure news happened at the end of last week, or Saturday actually, and we haven't recorded a podcast since then. So there's a lot of stuff that's been gone over. Like we don't need to go over a ton of it.
Who restructures on Endymion Day?
Well, no, it wasn't Endymion Day.
Oh, wasn't? Okay.
No, it was Saturday, this past Saturday. Endymion
I got
was 2 Saturdays ago. Yeah.
Right. Never mind. Sorry.
You've been out of town. You don't even know.
Yeah, I'm lost.
But yeah, so and one of the reasons I was very confident it was going to happen, like I don't have a ton new to tell you about it, just because I've made it clear that I thought this was going to be the case from day one. I didn't expect him to take a pay cut. I didn't expect the Saints to cut him. I didn't expect the Saints to really even go down the road of trying to trade him, because you would not be able to generate a market for a guy that he can say no at any point to any trade he doesn't want to deal with. So you're not going to get any quality asset out of that equation. So it's not even worth putting yourself in that weakened position. I've seen people say, oh, maybe they're still going to cut him or trade him. You would not have restructured his contract just to cut or trade him. Then you would be on the hook for $60 million in dead cap next year without the ability to even make it a post June 1 cut. So this is not something you would have done. So here we are. The Saints have restructured Derek Carr, and what that has allowed, and one of the reasons it was the most likely situation, is that instead of desperately having to take every restructure at your disposal just to make scratch and eliminate so much of your ability to operate this free agency cycle, you now were able to get to cap compliance very easily. Like, again, it's Tuesday, the day before the first day of the league year, and the Saints have $16 million in salary cap space to work with. They have already traded for a nose tackle. They have already inked Chase Young to a 3-year extension, and you still have about right. Well, you still have about $31 million that you can clear up if you need to. If you want to, it's at 29 now because they did restructure Pete Werner. So like you had the options of having flexibility, not having to restructure every sketchy contract that you might not want to touch, and you have the quarterback you're paying. In the other scenario, you have gotten rid of Derek Carr. That's your pros and cons list. And so it makes sense why they did what they did. People don't like it. But again, like I said in the last segment, one thing the Saints have been very consistent about is they're not going to make decisions just because the fans want it.
No, and clearly, I mean, I'm fairly confident that Kellen Moore was like, no, I want to work with Derek Carr. It wasn't forced upon him in any way.
Yeah, this is what Kellen said on Monday when we did the meet the staff event, which is like 27 coaches. It was a lot going on, a lot happening. And a lot of interesting conversations. I like the staff. He's put together, a lot of really interesting characters. But this is what Kellen had to say about Derek specifically, and how that whole situation developed.
Wanting to keep him in the envision. How do you envision him now that you're keeping him this season?
Yeah, I think we've been consistent through this whole process. We feel really good about Derek and really excited to team up with him and the things that he can do for us and the things that he can help lead us into some special ways.
Why was the restructure the best option for you guys?
Yeah, I think that's obviously just the business side of it. Obviously playing conversations on that side of it. And, again, at the end of the day, we want him here and it'll be a good situation.
Did you guys ask him to take a pay cut?
They just have conversations like any player on this roster. And so there's a lot of conversations that happen with, Mickey, Kai, agents. And, usually we stick to the football and usually it suits out better that way.
When those conversations with Derek Carr were occurring, was there any point where he or his agent sought a trade or was kind of exploring his options?
We just talked about our obviously confidence in this situation and the ability for him to have success here. I think we got a great group here, from the players, the coaching staff to the environment that we're going to be able to create for him. Felt really, really good and comfortable with what we're going to be able to provide.
You mentioned earlier about going through the process at their opening presser. How soon into the process did you know Derek was your guy, or did you know right away and just didn't?
Yeah, certainly you take this job with the intentions of some of the top players being here, and we felt very comfortable with them. Obviously, anytime you go through these things, it's great to connect first as people and build those relationships and go from there. And so, I'm really, really excited to work with them.
Yeah, and so again, that was Kellen Moore talking on Monday about how that situation developed. We're not going to get a ton out of Kellen Moore in these settings. I think that's what's been made very clear. in the first few media availabilities we've had with him is, he's not gonna be a guy who just gives stuff away. He's very kind of rehearsed. One thing he did make clear is he has spoken to Derek Carr. That's something that I've seen kind of reported and rumored that there's no contact at all between the Saints and Derek.
That's just because we haven't seen a presence on social media for Super Bowl or Mardi Gras, and people are pissed off.
Yeah, and I mean the quiet, the silence is notable. This was not the case last year. Last year he made a point that he was trying to be more visible, that he was trying to be part of the community and do all these things, and that's not what's happened this year. So kind of read into that what you want. I know that a lot of people were upset that he didn't take a pay cut. I've never been of the belief that someone should feel like I gotta take a pay cut to help the team. It's just a lazy narrative to dislike somebody. Because why should he take a pay cut? Genuinely, why should he take a pay cut? Is it because you think he should be looking in the mirror saying, man, I suck? I don't deserve it. He is the 16th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. The only reason his salary seems huge is because the way the Saints account for it, which I think they've accounted for $18 million of his $150 million contract over the first 2 years. That's their choice, right? They can restructure, they can do whatever they want, but that's not an unreasonable contract. 4 years, $150 million. Again, Myles Garrett is making $40 million a year. There are position players making more than Derek, a starting quarterback in the NFL. Sam Darnold is making that much money now. They're basically on the same line from a contract perspective. Geno Smith is a little lower. But I don't know. I'm never gonna preach about a guy who should take a pay cut, because if someone came to me and why don't you take less money, I'd be like, get the hell out of here. Why? How are you going to use that?
The thing with Carr is we've talked about a ton. Obviously, fans not happy with him. They don't like him. Is there a more disliked player that you can think of with this organization in the past? Eli Apple pops into my mind, but there was good reason behind that.
Eli was trying to be hated, I feel like. Derek is not. Derek, and to an extent, maybe, I think, I don't know if there's anything Derek could do at this point to kind of right that ship other than go win football games. We've talked about this. He's kind of painted himself.
A pay cut. I don't even know if that would help him.
Well, that's the thing. If I'm Derek and I'm really trying hard to kind of get this PR thing going in the right direction, that's what I do. I was okay, I'll play ball.
Right.
And we're gonna be able to. Yeah, I'm going to be a team first guy, and we're going to play this out. And I'm not going to give you a ton, but I am going to be amenable to something here.
Yes.
So that it can at least be spun positively for me. I'm just speaking from a PR perspective of everyone seems to hate me. What can I do? What is something tangible I can do that is not going to, functionally change a ton for me? And that was probably it. He didn't want to do that. And I'm not going to begrudge him that, but I am going to say you had an opportunity to try to kind of ride this rising tide of, hey, we got a new head coach. This is a new era. This can be looked at positively. And I can be a part of that. Instead, it's no, I signed a contract. I'm going to honor that contract, and you're going to honor your contract, right? That's the deal. And I'm on board for that. That's not unreasonable. I just think it's I kind of feel like Derek has almost embraced being the villain at this point. And maybe that's for the best. Villains are entertaining.
Yeah, well, the Saints need to be entertaining for sure, because right now, you would think from this fan base they were a 2-win team last year. And it wasn't much better, but I'm just hoping that they can somehow restore that week 1 and 2 magic with a healthy roster and Derek. I'm not expecting that for next year at all. I'm not saying they're going to win the division, but I don't think we're in that 5-win realm.
Do you mean you don't think they're in that 5-win realm because they're going to win more or less?
Win more than that.
Yeah, I think one guy I talked to yesterday was Ted Rath, who's the new director of Pro Performance, and They have a very easy schedule, right? They have a fourth place schedule. They're going to get a lot of bad teams on their schedule next year.
Sure.
Right? What the Saints have not had in the last 3-something years is even reasonable injury luck.
Exactly.
And, how much of that is driven by what they're actually doing versus what they're not doing, I don't know. It's impossible to say, because there's an extent, like, look at the Lions. Like, the Lions season was basically the Lions have a great roster. Their season was undone by injuries. Like, they got to a point where they had so many injuries they could not defend. And, they got as far as they could under those circumstances. And then, they ran into a team that was just going to run them off the field from an offensive perspective, and they couldn't keep up. And, and so I think this is a team that, again, like we talked about, like, the depth isn't great, but if you get reasonably good injury luck, then I do think you can go win 7 to 10 games. I don't think the ceiling is much higher than that. And normally you would say, like, hey, if you're a team that feels like you're a quality group and you get really good injury luck, your ceiling should be 12 to 13 games. Right? Now, I don't think your floor is as low as people are making it out to be. And one of the reasons is you have a quarterback. And I think when you hear Kellen Moore talk and you kind of look at the situation, like, they had an option. They could have done the tank thing. They don't want to do that. And I'm okay with that. Like, I wouldn't want to walk into a scenario and be like, how is the best way to win 2 games? Like, what decisions are we going to make to ensure that we're definitely terrible?
Right. We're in the arch conversation since everybody wants to be on board with that.
Yeah. And I just don't see, like, I mean, people are going to be mad about it, but like, that was never going to be the case. Like, you're going to make the decisions based on how can we be the best team possible with the players on the field. And, it is frustrating, because I would love to see the Saints kind of just tear it down and start from scratch. But it's not going to happen. And what would that even look like, really? Like, people would turn off the games just as soon as they're going to turn off the games this year, when you're talking about all these players you've never heard of coming out of, South Central Louisiana State University, getting torched on, a go route. But it is what it is. And I'm cautiously optimistic that against this weak schedule and with kind of a unscouted, rebuilt offense and defense, you can find some wins. And I again, and I say this a lot, like, we talk about Derek Carr as if he's this, like, terrible, terrible quarterback with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. The guy has completed 68.8% of his passes since joining the Saints. He's got about 6,000 something yards and I think it's 27 starts, because he only played in He only played in 10 games this year, and that's got baked in a few games that he left midway through due to injuries in the season before that. Right? He's thrown 40 touchdowns against 13 interceptions. In 10 starts last year, he was sacked 8 times, and this offensive line was Swiss cheese. Right? Like we can look at it and pretend that the reason they should get rid of Derek Carr is because he's terrible, but it's just not the case. You want to get rid of Derek Carr because you don't like the guy. And I get that. I understand that. But like I said, the team is not making decisions based on whether the fans like a guy. They're making decisions on what they see on the field. And what you see on the field is the 16th highest paid quarterback playing top 16 quarterback play. Like, that's what it is. And so we'll go from there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what fans want for this season, at least. I'm assuming, they wanted to blow, a majority of folks wanted to just blow it up and hope for a top, 3 pick in the NFL draft for next season.
Yeah, I think if this was Madden and you had the ability to sim to next season,
right, they would love to do that.
Would love that. I think people would, if you had the ability to actually just hit that button and it's 2026 and you just ripped a Band-Aid off. But, like, that's the problem, is you can't do that. You got to convince a roster of 53 guys to go out there and run and hit and get hit and get concussed and break bones and tear ligaments for you to tank? No, you can't do that. You can't sell anybody on that. This coaching staff's not interested in that. The roster's not interested in that. So, I'm interested to see how this kind of coalesces, right? Like how much of this awkwardness kind of bleeds into the offseason. Does Derek kind of emerge from the wilderness?
When do we hear from him? Right.
Yeah. I mean, does he do the golf event with Drew again? That was kind of one of the main things we saw him do last year. I don't know, but
anything, something. Looking forward to working with new head coach Kellen Moore. Please, I can write it for you.
Yeah, right. It is weird. We have not heard him say a peep. Like last year, he did a podcast with James Jones and can't remember the other host's name, but like we haven't seen anything like that. Any interviews, any like side quests that he's on. Haven't seen him, haven't heard from him, but it is what it is. And the Saints are in the situation they're in. And, I honestly, hey, if I'm Spencer Rattler, this is a good thing for me because if you cut Derek Carr, you are probably drafting a quarterback in the top 10. Like that's probably the thing that happens is you cut Derek Carr because you intend to go get a quarterback. I don't think if you're keeping Derek, it's tough to also sell me on, okay, I want to draft a quarterback in the top 10. Now, you may draft a quarterback. I just don't think it's going to happen in the top 10 because keeping Derek is an indicator that you're trying to compete. So I think that sets up for a scenario where Spencer Rattler can be your backup again. Derek, I mean, let's be real, probably gets hurt. And then you're able to get in there and get more snaps and not be thrown into the fire. Like I've said this before, the best case scenario for Spencer Rattler was objectively not they cut Derek Carr and throw Spencer Rattler in so he can be the sacrificial lamb for 17 games. And then you can replace him with the quarterback you wanted all along. Like that's not a win for Spencer. A win for Spencer is another year to develop in a system so that if you do move on in 2026, then, and even if you draft a quarterback in that next draft, Spencer can be the bridge guy. So we'll see, but we're going to get more Derek Carr. That's what's just what's going to happen. And I actually think that he can run Kellen Moore's offense. Like that's the part that I think people are glossing over is like, oh, he's just going to be terrible. I don't think he's going to be terrible. I think he's actually going to fit that offense pretty well. And
no, from hearing from Kellen Moore, Doug Nussmeier, Scott Tolzien, all the QBs on this roster, you got to figure they know what they see under center with Derek. I'm just hoping that, he can stay healthy and, somehow, some way we get the magic that happened in weeks 1 and 2. I know, the health had a ton to do with it, which from wide receivers to, your tight end and Taysom Hill, there was just, the center with Eric McCoy, that definitely in week 3 seemed to be the whole downfall of everything. But yeah, I'm more worried about health with this roster than, Derek Carr sticking around again.
Yeah, a lot of quarterbacks. I did ask Scott Tolzien about that. Scott Tolzien, not a talker. I understand why he and Kellen Moore get along because they're very similar in that way. There's a little awkward quarterback-brained people. But yeah, Linehan, Nussmeier, Tolzien, and Kellen Moore. A lot of former NFL
a lot of QBs, man.
Well, and not just quarterbacks. Like all these guys played quarterback in high school. Like even like the running backs, wide receivers, they're all quarterbacks in high school. But these were all high-level quarterbacks. These were all NFL quarterbacks, right? Head coach in Scott Linehan's case, 2 Idaho guys, a lot of the state of Idaho quarterbacking, to be specific. Scott Linehan, Idaho, Doug Nussmeier, Idaho, Kellen Moore, Boise State. Joel Thomas was also the star running back at Idaho. So a lot of Idahoans.
We're missing out on Kellen Moore. I'm not Kellen Moore. I'm sorry. Caden Ellis.
Yeah. Of all the times we should have had Caden Ellis on this, although he's on the wrong side of the ball. These are all offensive Idahoans. Idahofans. That doesn't work. I'm sorry.
Idahoians.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll talk more and vastly more and complain and yell and do all this about Derek Carr.
It is what it is.
I'm just repeating myself. That's why I'm not getting too worked up about it. Is because this is a lot of the stuff I've said. And this is where we are. And it is interesting because Kellen I feel like could have walked in the building and said, I don't want Derek.
Yeah.
I do feel like that he could have done that. Like people say he's just going to cape for Mickey Loomis or whatever. I don't think that's the case. If he didn't want Derek on this roster, I don't think Derek would be on this roster. And that's how I feel about it.
I believe that's the case as well. I hope that's true in the end, because you'd hate to be saddled with a guy you don't want to be with, but I haven't gotten that feel at all, but I could be dead wrong too. So
you wouldn't tell us.
No, exactly. I gotta suck it up for 1 year with Derek.
He would keep that to himself. But all right, let's wrap up the segment. We're going to come back. I just want to talk a little bit more about the coaching meetings that we had. What are our thoughts on the coaching staff? Brandon Staley in particular, he had some interesting things to say. First time we've talked to him since he took over that job. So let's hit the break, hit that subscribe button, and we will come right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold, post Mardi Gras edition. It's my birthday edition. Thanks everyone for all the balloons and everything you've sent my way. I have a couple of them.
There you go. Sending a virtual shot of bourbon your way too.
Yeah, an NFT, like a bourbon NFT.
Yeah.
Ooh, I got a light show. I should use these more often. Next time you say something, I can disagree.
Wow, the production value has gone up so much with this program.
I've been able to do this the whole time. I just never told you. All right, so let's continue on. I made that joke before. So yeah, let's talk about it. We had a meet and greet with the coaches. It was something that the Saints organized, which I do appreciate. It's not something that we have done in the past, but this is the first time in a long time that the Saints have hired more than like a handful of coaches at once.
Yeah.
So they didn't need to introduce 20 different people. And to me, that's, and Bobby talked about this, and I do think it's interesting. Like, it seems like every year there's a new coach of some kind. Like you're adding in one more piece to the staff. Because I don't think there's a limit. The NFL doesn't have a limit on how many coaches you can have. I think it's really just how much does the owner want to pay for a coaching staff? Because you got to pay everyone. And it seems like every year almost they just kind of like get another coach worked into the budget somehow, because there's like 25 coaches. It's like the coaching staff is getting closer and closer to the size of the active roster. Like you could basically have like a personal coach for like every 3 players gets their own like personal coach.
At least they don't count against the cap.
Well, right. Again, it's like, as whatever the owner's willing to pay these guys, they can come and pay. But yeah, one of the things that kind of came out of yesterday that I did find interesting was, got Terry Joseph as an example, Bo Davis as an example, Peter Sermon is an example, although I don't know if he factors in the same way. I think coaches are trying as hard as they possibly can to get from a lot of coaches, I should say, are trying as hard as they possibly can to get from college to the NFL. And for a while, it was going the other direction because colleges had all this infrastructure. They had a lot of money to hand out. There's no salary cap. So, like they don't have to pay the players, or they didn't have to pay the players. So all the money was spent on the coaching staff and the facilities. Now with NIL and the transfer portal, it's a nightmare to try to recruit, to try to retain. You spend all these time recruiting guys, and then at the end of the day, you sit on their couch, you talk to their grandma, and then it's like, yeah, but they're going to offer me more money, so that's where I'm going to go. So like, it's all these guys that have made their living as college coaches are just like, this is a nightmare. Bo Davis took a pay cut to come to LSU, to come to the Saints.
Right.
Like he didn't get a raise. He gets paid less to show up and coach the defensive line for the Saints rather than coach the defensive line for LSU. And why do you think that is? Because the culture in college football right now is just a nightmare with NIL. Terry Joseph, same thing. Terry Joseph wanted out of college, so he had an opportunity to come home to New Orleans, coach the Saints, and that's what he's doing. But yeah.
Who I didn't see yesterday, I don't know if you ran into him, maybe I just missed him. TJ Paganetti, I was just interested in hearing from him.
He was there.
Okay, I missed him totally.
Yeah, no, I talked to him very briefly. A lot of these guys I just kind of said hi to and introduced myself.
Sure.
Like, there's like 20 people there. I caught up with Joel Thomas, caught up with Adam Gristic, who, I talked to at the Senior Bowl, and I asked him like point blank, I was like, do you have any idea whether you're going to have a job? And he's like, no. And then I asked him again yesterday. I was like, how honest were you being at that point? And he was like, I had no clue. Like, I was very much like, I may or may not have a job. And, it's interesting because, like, okay, who sticks around, who doesn't? And, he wanted to stay in part because his wife is, I think, 6 or 7 months pregnant with their second daughter, and she didn't want to move. Like, she's like, I like it here. I want to stay here. He didn't know Peter Sermon, who's the linebackers coach. It was kind of like, yeah, okay, this is a fit. I like this. And I like that they're kind of retaining a piece of that linebacker room. Michael Hodges is now in Cincinnati, right. But there's a lot of good development that's been going on in that linebacker room. And so I like keeping him around. But it's a good mix. I think it's a good mix of kind of new faces, some older faces, guys who have worked together, some guys who haven't. Like, you look at a Doug Nussmeier, he's been with Kellen basically every stop for the last 6 years, right? Paginetti, he was with the Eagles, crossed paths with Kellen Moore for 1 season. Now he's here, right? Kyle Valero has been in the NFL forever. Now he's kind of latched on to Kellen Moore, and he's the assistant wide receivers coach with Keith Williams, who was the Saints wide receivers coach last season. So it's a good kind of mix. Brendan Nugent coming back, worked with Kellen previously. Ted Rath, again, I mentioned him earlier. He's taking over for essentially what Dr. Matt Ray did. They've worked together. I had someone comment on YouTube previously saying he wasn't on the Eagles last year. It's kind of a weird situation. He was on the Eagles last year, but he kind of left mid-season to go write a book. But he had always talked to Kellen, and like, it was understood, like, hey, if you go get a head coaching job, I'll come be your director of pro performance. And that's exactly what happened. So he's down here now. Like, he's an interesting guy. Chatted with him a good bit about, like, travel schedules and, whether you should go out to international trips early or wait, and, diet and stuff like that. And I think he is of the belief that players need to be worked hard to stay healthy. And that's something the Saints have not done. So hopefully that's a change, and hopefully that leads to some better results from a health perspective.
You said did he talked about like the overseas games and if he believes in going there early or not?
I think he believes in acclimating.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, like, he was just like, it's really as long as you're consistent. And honestly, the bigger issue is not getting out there. It is coming back, because all these guys, you play this game, you have all this inflammation, then you get on a plane for 14 hours and guys, that's why you typically have a bye week afterward, because the recovery process after those games is miserable. Yeah. And a lot of times you're not ready to play even 2 weeks later. Like, it's tough to get your body back after those games. And it's just going to be more and more and more. And the NFL is just like, money, 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 money. So, yeah. But I thought he had some interesting things to say.
Yeah, I was just asking that because the last time, obviously, the Saints went overseas, it didn't work for them, and the Vikings just showed up and ended up winning the game.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Vikings won the game because they were the better team.
Right.
I don't know if the travel schedule was the reason. But, and it was a good game. It was a close game. Saints could have won that game. Andy Dalton started. That was the first Andy Dalton game. They threw Pete Carmichael to the Wolves on that Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. Like, oh, Jameis wasn't out there. Are you? I think this.
Right.
Okay. Never had a chance, but no. So we talked to Kellen Moore. Obviously, we talked to Doug Nussmeier. Talked to a lot of these guys, but the most interesting interview was Brandon Staley, because Doug can talk all he wants. A lot of these guys don't have a lot of information to share right now. They haven't installed anything. They're very, very early in this process. I don't even know if all these guys live here yet.
Right.
But Brandon, he's in charge of that defense in a way that Doug will never be in charge of that offense. Like, if we want to talk offense, we go to Kellen Moore. If you want to talk defense, you go to Brandon Staley. And, one thing that I'll say about Brandon Staley is you can tell he was a head coach before, just in listening to him talk and the way he talks about the game, and just kind of his understanding of how he needs to address certain situations, and being detailed without being overly detailed and giving a ton away. I understand why he was a head coach, and I think he's got a good vibe for that defense. I think he'll be well received in that defense.
No, I think we obviously mentioned it already with Staley. It's like, asked about the 3-4 defense. He's like, kind of let me get this roster set, and that'll tell you a little bit more about what kind of scheme we're working.
Yeah, and I have some cuts here. So yeah, this is what he had to say when he was asked about the scheme.
Better with the personnel, or how do you go about that?
You just said it. We're at the beginning, and so much of how you're going to play is the type of personnel that you're going to be coaching. So we're at the beginning of that here with free agency and the draft process, and we've got a core group that's going to be coming back. But until that group is out there on the field in the springtime, I don't think we're truly going to know. We're going to try and be flexible enough to be able to defend all the different types of offenses that you have to play against. And we want to be specific in the matchup. We want to make sure that we go into every game with a plan to win. But a lot of what we're going to do is centered on who this group of guys we're going to be coaching.
I think Kellen said it really doesn't, matter with the basis because you end up in so many sub packages anyway.
That's right. Yeah, it's a 3-receiver league, and you've got to be able to match up in 5 defensive backs. That's what you play 70+% of the time now, and I think the different versions of 5 DBs is kind of what can give you an advantage, but that's where the game is now, and it's always been a matchup game. Now you're just matching up against 3 receivers.
Flexibility is a big word. I feel like we've heard from Staley and people talking about Kellen Moore as well as Moore himself.
Yeah, no, and that's the one big takeaway I had from that answer. And I think it's like he's not BSing there. Like, I do think that if you boil down Brandon Staley's defensive philosophy to one thing, it is versatility. It is, I want to be able to defend every single type of offense that can walk in and face us on a week-to-week basis. Now, that's tough to do. That's why I think his defenses get the criticism of they're a little overly complicated because they are trying to do a lot of different things. But I also think that's why when you ask, like, hey, are you going to run a 3-4 or 4-3 defense? It's just like, I don't know yet. I haven't really decided. Now, I do think that he's going to run a 3-4 defense at a base level, but right. I do think there's going to be a lot of 4-down tendencies. Like it's going to be a hybrid scheme. That's why when you sign a Chase Young, it's tough to know. It's like, well, can he play outside linebacker? I don't know. Are you going to ask him to play outside linebacker? That's a good question.
Right.
He's a bigger guy. He could probably shift in and play some 3-4 defensive end if you needed to and get some more pass rushes on the field around him. So it's an interesting situation. I think I liked the hiring when it happened. And after talking to him, I like it even more because I just think he's a very confident guy. And I need a confident guy leading my defense if I'm a first-time head coach who's going to be hyper-focused on the offense.
Yeah, having that experience, too, is obviously going to help with his, I guess you would call him buddy, but, is now, co-worker again in Kellen Moore. I know you asked about this. Is it kind of awkward if he was the main guy before and now he's the guy under Kellen Moore? And no, just, a professional working relationship. If not, that's a better thing, knowing more about each other in this situation.
Kind of just weird to make that shift at all?
Oh, not at all. I mean, we're all teammates. I don't care if you're the head coach or a coordinator or a position coach. You're all in it together. I believe in, his vision for leading the football team. So when he reached out to me and talked about how he wants to lead this football team, a lot of it was similar to when we were working together. But now he gets to do it, his way. And I believe in him and that way as much as anything.
Has your experience as a head coach helped guide him through this first season?
I think anytime you can join up with people who have experienced something, it's going to give you an advantage, but especially if you know that person. So I'll be able to help him where he needs it. I think we're very fortunate in this organization, with Mickey and his group, a very experienced, front office, and then this coaching staff. I mean, you look at the staff that he's been able to put together. I think there's a lot of really complementary experiences, but the fact that we've worked together, hopefully it gives us a better starting point.
Yeah, and I call bullshit on that a little bit. Because like there's no way, there's no level of like weirdness of, hey, okay, I'm gonna order you around now. Like I was your boss, now you're my boss. Like I don't care who you are. That's weird.
I think it's not as severe if it would be if they were both on the same sides of the ball, but it's kind of like, hey, you go do your thing on offense, I'm going to do my thing on defense, you know?
Yeah, no, I do. I think you're right. I think that if he was Kellen's offensive coordinator,
right,
then it would probably be a little different. Whereas, yeah, he is that is one of the things. Like if I'm a defensive coordinator, I always want to be paired with a offensive head coach because then I can at least do my own thing.
Stick to your side of the ball.
Yeah. So I think it is more of a partnership in that sense, even if they're not on the same level, because I don't think Kellen's going to be ordering him around and saying, this is how it should be going in your meeting room. He's going to trust him to do those things because he's seen him do those things and he trusts him to do those things. All that said, like, I do think, having Brandon in the room, having Scott Linehan, another former head coach in the room, if you recall, when we talked to Jeff Morrow, the guy who wrote the story on Kellen from his high school days, that's one of the things he mentioned specifically is, we asked him what we should think about his staff. And he's like, I think he's going to bring Scott Linehan back. And he did. So good call by Jeff there. So he's kind of the guy on the offensive side that Kellen's going to be able to lean on. But, being a head coach is difficult. And having guys who have done it, I think you wanted to get those types of people in the building. Because like Doug Nussmeier has been around the league forever. He's never been a head coach. I don't think he really knows, what that process is like from having done it. So, hopefully that helps Kellen, because I do think there's a lot of kind of nuances to that job that might not be obvious to someone stepping into it the first time. That a guy like Linehan, a guy like Staley can help impart.
It's definitely the biggest thing too from the meeting with the entire staff is it really has been a whole reworking. There's no continuity here anymore. They've definitely ripped the Band-Aid off when it comes to this coaching staff.
Yeah, but not the roster.
No,
not the roster. Which is interesting. Tyrann Mathieu, Nick Underhill just reported that Tyrann Mathieu reworked his deal, so he'll be here. So they at least have one safety under contract, which is good. And we'll see if they bring anybody else in. But yeah, that's about it. I think in general, like the coaching staff is excited to be here. They're excited for what this can be. I think they should be. I think it's a good coaching staff. But then again, this is the time of year where you're going to be excited because nothing bad has happened yet. How about in week 4 when you're 1-3? How do things look then? But that's something to worry about down the road.
Now, the biggest thing now is hopefully this, this roster just can stay healthy. You mentioned that with that has not been on their side the past couple of years. And I don't care if you got Sean Payton or, Mike Vrabel, whatever coach you hold in high regard and wish was around with this team, it ain't going to help if you don't got the players on the field and they're always in the hot tub or getting, getting worked on in some kind of way and trying to do recovery instead of playing games. And man, oh man, hopefully that can be something that's a drastic difference because without a healthy roster, this team really has no shot.
No, I agree. Like the second half of last season, it was like, okay, this is not a great team, but the team we're watching is not the team that we're supposed to be watching.
Sadly, pretty much of what you're seeing from the Pelicans in basketball as well.
I don't want to talk about the Pelicans. Why would you even bring that up? Why would you ruin my day like that?
17 games left, baby.
Oh, God. I ran into Todd Graffanini yesterday, and it was basically like he had the same vibe I had in like week 15 going out to play the Packers. It was just like,
let it out, right?
Let it end. I have to go out here and pretend to be excited every day.
Hey, you mentioned Mo Bamba. He's in the building now.
Yeah, they can finally play the song and be excited about it. But all right, that's going to be it. That is our intro to free agency podcast. There will be a lot more as we continue. We're going to do a second episode this week, hopefully on Thursday, kind of recapping all that's happened. I assume we'll have a good bit going on today tomorrow. Again, we're recording this a little after noon. It's a little after 1 now. So if anything happens later in the day on Tuesday, we won't have it in this podcast. I apologize, but don't get mad. Don't give us any 1-star reviews like that time we didn't talk about the Pete Carmichael news on the podcast that was recorded before the Pete Carmichael news. Like I think we have 1-star review on the podcast, and it was a guy angry that the podcast we recorded before news happened did not include that news in it. And it still makes me angry to this day.
Good. It fuels you to be better.
It fuels me to make note of this many, many times an episode. If you're annoyed that I keep repeating this, know that it's because that one guy left that 1-star review because I apparently didn't say enough times what time of day. Anyway, I'm not bitter about it at all.
We should just be live 24/7, Jeff.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a live episode on Thursday. Maybe we haven't done a live episode in a while, so we can kind of get some feedback and hear what people think and get the complaints and all that good stuff. But all right, anything else? Any parting words?
No, just anxious for the start of the new league year, and we are off and running with football season. The draft coming up, and then after that, you kind of hit a bit of a lull.
Yeah, I mean, I always have a big party to celebrate the like New Year's.
We should.
Yeah, I'll bring the brats. Cars for everyone. Anyway,
it might be almost time for another mock draft, huh?
Yes, and we'll do that eventually. We've only done one, and the draft is only like a month and a half away.
I guess post free agent, the first week of free agency, right?
We'll get it. We'll get it. March is Chase Young month. That's what I've learned. That's every year in March we get Chase Young news. That's how I celebrate my birthday.
And happy birthday to you. Yes, sir.
Thanks for finally saying it, Steve. All right. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all.
Peace out, everybody. Who dat?